Leave me alone. You don't know what you're getting into. Walk away right now before someone sees you with me." That was what he said to her, and that was exactly when she knelt down beside him in the pouring rain and refused to move. He was a Hell's Angel. She was homeless. And every single person who passed that highway in the next 40 minutes either slowed down to stare or pulled out their phone to record a dying man. Nobody stopped. Nobody except her. And that one decision was about to unravel a secret 30 years in the making. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell and follow along till the very end. And drop a comment below telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The night it happened, the rain came down so hard, it sounded like the sky itself was angry. Phoenix, Arizona doesn't get storms like that often. When it does, people remember them. The kind of rain that turns the streets into rivers and makes the air smell like iron and old pavement. The kind of rain that makes people want to stay inside, lock their doors, and pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist. And most of them did exactly that. Most of them. There was a stretch of cracked highway on the edge of town, the kind of road that used to matter before a newer overpass was built 3 exits down, and everyone forgot it existed. A few street lights, 2 of them flickering, one of them dead. A boarded-up gas station on the right. A chain-link fence running alongside the left. And in the middle of all of it, at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, a black Harley-Davidson Road King and the body of a man came sliding across 40 feet of wet asphalt and stopped moving at the base of a concrete barrier. The collision had come fast. A delivery truck had drifted lanes without signaling, the driver distracted, exhausted, running behind on a route that didn't allow for delays. By the time he saw the headlight of the motorcycle in his mirror, it was already too late. The impact sent the Harley spinning sideways. The man riding it went down hard. The truck kept going, and whether the driver didn't realize what he'd done or didn't want to admit it, he never stopped. The man on the ground was Caleb Whitmore, 54 years old, 6 feet 2 inches of weathered muscle and scar tissue. His black leather vest was soaked through in seconds, patches across every inch of it, the colors of the Hells Angels, a chapter that had ridden out of Arizona for 26 years. His name was embroidered on the left chest pocket in red thread. On the back of the vest in bold letters that meant something specific to people who knew what they were looking at. Hells Angels, Arizona. He was known by a road name that had followed him for 3 decades. Hawk. They called him Hawk because of the way he watched everything silent, patient, and absolutely certain before he moved. The men in his chapter said he could read a room better than most people could read a book, said he never panicked, said he had ice in his blood. Right now, Caleb Whitmore Hawk was lying with his left leg pinned under 600 pounds of motorcycle blood running freely from a gash across his left temple and 3 ribs that ground against each other every time he tried to breathe. The ice in his blood wasn't helping him much now, but his eyes were still open, and he was watching the headlights go past, 1, 2, 3, 4, each one slowing just enough to register what they were seeing, each one speeding up again the moment they did. He couldn't blame them. He understood exactly what they saw. He had spent enough of his life on the other side of that reaction, watching people flinch when he walked into a room, watching mothers pull their children a little closer when his chapter rolled past. He knew the equation. He had lived inside it for decades. Black leather vest with those patches meant something in this country. It meant don't get involved. It meant this is not your problem. It meant whatever happened to that man, he probably brought it on himself. He understood it. He didn't have the energy to resent it right now. "Hey," his voice came out rougher than he expected. "Hey, somebody." A car slowed. The window came down halfway. A man in his 30s with a ball cap and a phone already raised. Caleb looked directly at him. "I need help. Call someone. My leg is—" The window went back up. The car drove away. Caleb put his head back against the wet asphalt and stared up at a sky that was dumping rain directly into his face and told himself with the calm practicality of a man who had survived worse situations than this one that he needed to stay awake. He needed to keep breathing despite the ribs. He needed to figure out how to get the motorcycle off his leg without losing what was left of his circulation. I was running through this list methodically the way he always approached problems step by step, no panic when he heard footsteps. Fast ones, splashing through the standing water on the shoulder of the road. He turned his head and saw her running toward him. Young woman, small frame, soaked through hair, plastered flat, wearing a jacket that was 2 sizes too big and coming apart at one seam. A backpack bouncing against her shoulders. No umbrella, no car, nobody with her. She was running toward him like she had been waiting for this moment. Oh God, okay, I see you, I'm here. She dropped to her knees in the water beside him, and her hands were already moving, already checking, not fluttering, not hesitating, but actually moving with some kind of purpose that surprised him. Where are you hurt? Can you feel your leg? Is your neck? Can you turn your head? Okay, good. Stop. His voice came out harder than he meant it to. Stop. Look at what I'm wearing. She looked at the vest. She looked at the patches. She looked at his face. I see it, she said. Then you understand what I'm telling you. You're telling me to leave. I'm telling you there are people who are going to ask questions about who helped me tonight. I'm telling you that getting involved with me is not something you want on your life. I'm telling you, he paused and forced a breath through the damaged ribs, that I appreciate you stopping, but you should go. She sat back on her heels and looked at him for a long moment. The rain was hitting both of them equally. What's your name? She asked. He stared at her. What, your name? What is it? That's not why does that matter right now. Because I'm not leaving and I'd rather talk to you as a person than as a stranger. She unzipped the large jacket and pulled it off her own shoulders, bundling it without ceremony and pressing it against the gash on his temple. Hold that. Press hard. What's your name? He was so thoroughly caught off guard that he told her. Caleb. Emily. She was already looking at his pinned leg, assessing the angle of the motorcycle, calculating something. Caleb, I'm going to need you to help me get this bike off your leg. I can't do it alone and I'm not strong enough to lift it, but if I can find something to brace against, can you push from your side at all? My ribs. I know. I heard the way you were breathing. I'm not going to pretend that's going to feel good, but we need the leg free before help gets here or we might be looking at something much worse. She was scanning the nearby ground, moving quickly. I'm going to call 911 right now. Do you have a phone? Mine doesn't have service out here. Caleb reached slowly into his jacket pocket and produced his phone. Cracked screen but lit. She took it without asking, dialed, spoke to the dispatcher in a voice that was urgent but not panicked, giving the location, the condition, the motorcycle, the blood, and then put it on speaker and set it on the concrete barrier above his head. They're 12 minutes out, she said. You've done this before. It wasn't a question. The way she moved, the pressure she maintained on the wound, the way she had assessed and prioritized, that wasn't instinct. That was training. She didn't answer right away. She was pulling a length of something from her backpack, a bungee cord of all things, and looping it around a section of the concrete barrier as a brace point. I volunteered at a free clinic for 2 years, she said finally. Before. She didn't elaborate on the before. You're not a nurse. No. A pause. I was going to be. Something in the way she said it, flat and factual and completely without self-pity, landed with more weight than if she had said it dramatically. What happened? He asked. She looked at him. Are you seriously asking me about my life story right now? I'm trying to stay awake. She almost smiled. It was a complicated expression, something between tired and genuine. My mom got sick. I left school to take care of her. She was working the brace into position as she talked. She passed about 2 years later, and then she pulled the cord taut, ran out of road. How long have you been? 18 months, she said. She answered the question he hadn't finished asking. Give or take, living rough. There's a spot under the Camelback Bridge I've used the most. She said it the same way she said everything matter of fact, no asking for sympathies. Okay, Caleb, I need you to listen to me very carefully right now because we have maybe one shot at this. I'm listening. When I say go, I need you to push up on the frame with both hands. I know your ribs. I know, but I'm going to be pulling from this side simultaneously. And if we can get 6 inches, just 6 inches of clearance, you can slide the leg out. Can you do that? He looked at her. 18 months on the street. 2 years watching her mother die. No phone service, no car, running through a storm to help a man who told her to leave him there. I can do it, he said. Okay. She repositioned her hands. On 3. 1, 2, 3. The sound Caleb made when he pushed was not something he would ever repeat in polite company. The ribs screamed, his vision went white at the edges. He felt the motorcycle shift, felt the weight, redistribute, felt Emily pulling with everything her small frame had, and then felt the horrible, nauseating, beautiful sensation of the pressure on his leg releasing as he yanked it free. He fell back. He was gasping. The white edges of his vision were throbbing. Emily's hands were already on his leg, pressing, checking circulation. Can you feel this? Can you feel that? Wiggle your toes if you can. He wiggled them. Okay, she exhaled. Okay, good. I think it's broken, but I don't think you're losing the leg. You need to stay very still now. Do not try to sit up. She was repositioning herself beside him, taking back the bundled jacket from the concrete barrier, pressing it back to his temple. You're going to be okay. He looked up at her. She was absolutely soaked. Her hair was dripping onto his jacket. Her hands were steady. Why did you stop? He said. She didn't answer immediately. She was watching his color, checking his breathing with the professional focus of someone who had learned to monitor those things and hadn't entirely forgotten how. Because you were there, she said finally. Nobody else stopped. I know. They saw the vest. I know. She adjusted the pressure on his temple. I saw it too. Then why? Because that's not all I saw. She looked at him directly. I saw a man bleeding on the ground. That's what I saw first. The vest was second. Caleb Whitmore had not cried in front of another human being in 31 years. He had a specific memory of the last time, the year, the place, the circumstances. He had made himself a quiet promise that day about what kind of man he was going to be, and he had kept that promise with rigid consistency for 3 decades. He did not cry now, but something in his chest shifted that had nothing to do with the broken ribs. I'm going to stay with you, Emily said, until they get here. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. I want to, he said. Keep talking to me. About what? Anything, the clinic, school, whatever you want. He paused. Tell me about your grandmother. She went very still. How did you said you volunteered at a clinic. The way you said it, the way you moved, that didn't come from 2 years of volunteering. That came from somewhere earlier. Someone who showed you something, who taught you this. She looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had shifted just slightly. Something had opened in it. My grandmother was a nurse, she said. She worked in trauma care for 30 years. She used to let me follow her around when I was little. She never let me see anything that would scare me, but she would explain things as she went, what she was watching, for what the hands were supposed to do, how to keep someone calm. Emily pressed the jacket more firmly against his temple. She said the most important part of the job wasn't the technical skill. She said the most important part was making sure the person in front of you never felt alone. That even if you couldn't fix them, even if the situation was beyond anyone's ability to fix, the act of staying was its own kind of medicine. Caleb said nothing. He was watching her face. She passed 4 years ago, Emily continued. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast 3 months from diagnosis to... She stopped, cleared her throat. She was the best person I ever knew. She would have done exactly what I just did, except she would have been more organized about it, and she probably would have had the right equipment. Caleb's voice was very quiet when he spoke. What was her name? Grace, Emily said. Grace Carter. She worked at Aya. She stopped speaking because she had noticed something, the way his face had changed. Caleb, the clinical steadiness in her voice slipped for the first time. Caleb, what's wrong? Is it the pain? Is it? No. His voice came out strange, rough in a different way than before. No, it's not the pain. Then what? Grace Carter, he repeated. Yes. She worked trauma care. Yes, she in Phoenix. Emily stared at him. How do you know that? He didn't answer. His eyes were searching her face with an intensity that had nothing to do with his injuries and everything to do with something she didn't understand yet. Something that had just cracked open inside him like a fault line shifting after decades of pressure. Caleb. Her voice was steady, but her hands had stopped moving. How do you know where my grandmother worked? In the distance, coming through the rain, the first wail of a siren. Caleb reached up slowly, his arms shaking with the effort, and touched the bundled jacket she was holding against his temple. Not taking it from her, just touching it, like he was steadying himself against something. There's something I need to tell you, he said, right now. I've been looking for someone for 30 years, he said. I never found her. I thought... He stopped. His jaw tightened. I thought maybe I never would. The siren was getting closer. What does that have to do with my grandmother? Emily asked. He looked at her. The rain was still coming down. Before I tell you, he said, I need you to know that everything I'm about to say is true, all of it. I need you to know that before I say it, because when I say it, it's going to sound like something it isn't. It's going to sound like a story, Caleb. But it's not. His eyes held hers. It happened, and I have proof. And for 30 years, the proof has been sitting in a box in my office, waiting for the day I found the right person. The emergency lights were visible now, cutting through the rain at the far end of the road. Emily's hands had started moving again on pure professional instinct, making sure his head was positioned correctly, making sure the jacket was still applying correct pressure, but her eyes had not left his face. Tell me, she said. The lights were almost on them now. Your grandmother saved my life, Caleb said, when I was 8 years old, and I have spent every day of the 30 years since then trying to figure out how to pay that back. The ambulance pulled up 30 feet away, doors opening, paramedics coming fast across the wet pavement with a gurney. Emily Carter was absolutely still. Ma'am, one of the paramedics was at her shoulder. Ma'am, we've got him from here, you can... She didn't move. She was looking at Caleb Whitmore, at the man in the Hells Angels vest, who had just told her that the grandmother she had carried in her heart, like a wound, was the same woman who had started something she hadn't been able to see until this moment, and her eyes were doing something complicated that she would not have been able to describe. Ma'am, I hear you, she said quietly to the paramedic without looking away from Caleb. I hear you. Caleb's hand was being checked, his pulse taken, a cervical collar being positioned, but his eyes stayed on her face. And he said with the last of the energy he had left before they moved him, in a voice just loud enough for her to hear over the rain and the radio chatter and the systematic sounds of emergency response, Don't disappear on me, Emily Carter. She looked at him. I'll be here, she said, and she meant it in more ways than either of them quite understood yet. The paramedics moved him onto the gurney. The doors of the ambulance closed. The lights went back on, sweeping across the broken motorcycle. The wet asphalt, the concrete barrier, the length of bungee cord still looped around a post. Emily stood in the rain. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from cold, or not only from cold. She reached into her backpack, the small, battered backpack that contained everything she owned in the world, and her fingers found what they always found when she needed steadiness. A small, worn photograph. A woman in scrubs, mid-50s, laughing at something off camera. Grace Carter, the woman who had told her granddaughter over and over, from the time she was old enough to understand words, a person's worth is never decided by what others think of them. Emily stood in the rain and the dark on a stretch of highway that nobody important used anymore, holding the photograph she always carried, staring at the spot where the ambulance had been. Something had just happened. She could feel it in the way the air felt different, even in the storm, the way the night had tilted slightly on its axis, the way the ordinary sequence of one thing following another had been interrupted by something she didn't have language for yet. She didn't know what it was. She knew it was real. She put the photograph back in her backpack, pulled the backpack onto her wet shoulders, and stood there a moment longer. Somewhere across town, in an ambulance on a highway, a man named Caleb Whitmore was telling paramedics he was fine, stop asking, I've had worse, and somewhere in the part of him that had learned to keep things locked and organized and addressed only when necessary, something had come loose that he was going to have to deal with very, very soon. 30 years. He had been carrying something for 30 years. And a homeless girl in a too-big jacket, kneeling in the rain, refusing to walk away, had just put her hands on exactly the right thread. The rain didn't let up that night. But Emily Carter walked back toward the bridge where she slept, and the storm, for the first time in 18 months, felt like something she could move through rather than something she was buried under. She didn't know why. Not yet. But she would. The card he gave her was not fancy. It was plain white, slightly bent at one corner, with a phone number printed in simple black ink and 3 words underneath the number that she read 3 times before she believed them. Find me. Hawk. That was all. No title, no organization name, no explanation of who he was or what he meant when he said there was something she needed to know. Just a number and a name that wasn't even his real name, and the assumption that she would understand what to do with it. Emily turned the card over in her fingers in the gray light of the following morning to sitting on the edge of the concrete base under the Camelback Bridge, listening to the last of the storm drain away through the gutters above her. Her jacket was still damp. Her shoes had not dried overnight. She had maybe $4 and some change in the front pocket of her backpack, a granola bar from the food pantry 3 days ago that she had been rationing, and a card from a man she'd pulled out of a wreck on a highway that nobody used. She put the card in the small zippered interior pocket of the backpack, the same pocket where she kept the photograph of her grandmother. She told herself she would think about it later. That was a Sunday. By Wednesday, she had taken the card out 11 times. By Friday, she had almost called twice, once standing outside a convenience store that had a payphone on the side wall, once from a borrowed cell phone at the shelter on McDowell where she occasionally ate dinner. Both times she had stood there with the number half dialed and put it down. She didn't know what she was afraid of exactly. That it was the thing. She could not name it cleanly the way she could name most of her fears. She was not afraid of Caleb himself, whatever had passed between them in the rain. On that highway, she did not feel threatened by him. She was not afraid of the club, not in the immediate physical sense. She had spent 18 months on the street and had long since recalibrated her understanding of what was genuinely dangerous and what only looked that way. What she was afraid of, if she was honest with herself at 3 in the morning, with her back against the concrete and the city humming overhead, was something softer and more specifically painful than physical danger. She was afraid of needing something. She had gotten very good at not needing anything. She had built a kind of fortress out of it, out of low expectations and practical thinking, and the daily discipline of wanting only what she could actually have. The fortress was not comfortable, but it was solid. It had kept her moving. It had kept her functional. It had kept her from the particular devastation of hoping for something and then watching it not arrive. And now there was this card. And this man who had said her grandmother's name like it meant something to him that it also meant to her. And that was a crack in the fortress she had not budgeted for. She called on a Saturday morning from the payphone outside the convenience store. He picked up on the second ring. Emily Carter. His voice was still rough but stronger than it had been on the pavement. I was starting to wonder. How did you know it was me? Because I don't give that number to people I don't want calling it. A pause. How are you? The question landed strangely. Not because it was unusual, but because of how he asked it, like he actually wanted to know. Like the answer was information he was going to do something with. She had grown so accustomed to that question being social noise, a sound people made on their way to talking about something else, that hearing it asked with genuine weight caught her completely unprepared. I'm fine, she said automatically. You're lying. She opened her mouth and closed it. You've been on the street for 18 months and you just spent a night in the rain, he said. You don't have to lie to me. I'm not going to feel better about my situation if you pretend yours is fine. How is your situation? 2 broken ribs, 1 cracked. Hairline fracture in the left tibia. They want me off the leg for 4 weeks, which is not going to happen, but I appreciate the medical community's optimism. His voice was dry. They discharged me Thursday. I'm at home. That's fast. I have a persuasive personality. A beat. Emily, I said something to you before they put me in the ambulance. Do you remember? I remember. I need you to come in person. What I have to show you, it is not a phone conversation. She pressed the phone against her ear and looked down at the sidewalk. A man walked past with 2 grocery bags, a kid on a bicycle, an ordinary Saturday morning on an ordinary street. You said you've been looking for someone for 30 years, she said. Yes. You said my grandmother saved your life. Yes. And you said you have proof. A box of it. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful and deliberate, the way she spoke when she was trying to stay inside the fortress walls. I need you to understand something, she said. I don't have anything to offer anybody right now. I'm not saying that to be humble or to fish for reassurance. I'm saying it as fact. I've got a backpack and $4 in a bridge. So if whatever you want to tell me comes with some kind of expectation attached, some kind of I help you and you help me, I need to know that up front because I can't afford to owe anyone anything. Silence on his end. Not the silence of offense, the silence of someone thinking carefully about their next words. When Grace Carter sat with an 8-year-old boy in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning, Caleb said slowly, she asked him what he needed. He told her he was scared. She said okay. And then she sat with him for 4 hours until the fear was small enough for him to handle. She did not ask him what he could give her in return. She did not attach conditions. Another pause. I'm not attaching conditions, Emily. Come in. Let me show you what I have. That's all I'm asking. She leaned her forehead against the cool metal of the payphone housing for just a second. Okay, she said, text me the address. I'll send a car. You absolutely will not. Emily, I'll find my way. Text me the address. There was a sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh, cut short by what might have been the ribs. Fine, he said, address coming. She hung up and stood there with her hand still on the receiver and her heart doing something irregular inside her chest that she did not particularly want to examine. She went that afternoon. The address was in a neighborhood she hadn't spent much time in. Not wealthy exactly, but solid established. The kind of area where houses had been owned by the same families for 2 or 3 decades. She walked the last mile and a half because the bus route didn't quite reach. She didn't mind the walk. The walk gave her time to build the walls back up to where they needed to be. The house itself was modest for a man with a name like Hawk. Single-story, large-lot detached garage with the door down. No ornamentation, no statement making. The only thing that suggested anything about who lived there was the row of motorcycles visible through the fence gate. 4 of them lined up with the precision of a man who had opinions about the right way to park a machine. She knocked. The man who answered the door was not the man she had pulled out of the rain. How was the same man, obviously, same face, same height, same eyes, that watched everything, but on the ground, in the storm, he had been a wounded animal, running on adrenaline and stubbornness. Here, standing in his own doorway on a pair of crutches, with a fresh bandage at his temple, and the posture of someone actively pretending that the ribs didn't hurt, he was something else. Contained, deliberate, the kind of man who took up space without trying. He looked at her for a moment. You walked, he said. I said I would find my way. It's 4 miles from the bus stop. I know, I counted. She looked at the crutches. Should you be standing? Probably not. Come in. The inside of the house was clean and spare, in the wit of someone who did not keep things they didn't need. No excess furniture, no decoration for its own sake. Books on a shelf organized by something size maybe, or subject she couldn't tell from the door. A large table along one wall with what appeared to be organized stacks of folders and papers. And on that table, slightly separate from the rest, a single cardboard box, not large, the kind of box that reams of paper come in, the top folded closed. Emily saw it and went very still without knowing she had gone very still. Caleb saw her see it. Sit down, he said. I'll get you water. Or coffee. I have coffee. Coffee is fine. She sat at the table facing the box and did not touch it. She could hear him moving in the kitchen. The sound of a cabinet. The clink of ceramic. She heard him hiss once quietly under his breath and knew the ribs had caught him wrong reaching for something. She heard him not say anything about it and keep going. He came back with 2 mugs and lowered himself into the chair across from her with the specific, careful motion of a man who had broken ribs and was not going to let them dictate his behavior. He set the mugs down. He looked at the box. He looked at her. I'm going to tell you a story, he said, and I need you to not ask me to skip to the point because the point is in the story. Can you do that? I can do that. It starts when I was 8 years old, he said. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and looked at a point slightly above her shoulder, not avoiding her eyes, but accessing something interior, the way people do when they are retrieving a memory they have carried for a very long time. My father and I were coming back from a fishing trip, he said. August, road outside Flagstaff. The truck went off the shoulder on a curve, nobody's fault exactly. Wet road, bad visibility, one of those things. The truck rolled twice. He said it without drama, just the factual sequence. My father didn't make it. I was in the back seat. I had a concussion, a broken arm, and 3 hours of memories that I still cannot fully put together in order. He paused. What I do remember clearly is the hospital. A hallway very bright, my arm in a temporary splint, and not being able to stop shaking, not because of the cold, but because the man who was supposed to be alive was not alive. And I was 8 years old and nobody had told me what to do with that information. Emily had her hands around her mug, but she was not drinking. There was a nurse, Caleb said. She came down that hallway and she saw me, and she didn't walk past. She sat down on the floor next to me, not in a chair on the floor, so we were at the same level, and she said, "What's your name?" And I told her, and she said, "Caleb, my name is Grace." And then she didn't say anything else. She just sat there. The kitchen was very quiet. I kept waiting for her to say the things adults say in those situations. Caleb continued. Your father is in a better place. You have to be strong now. Everything happens for a reason. I had already heard some of those in the hours before from people who meant well and had no idea what they were doing to me with every word. He looked down at his mug. But Grace didn't say any of that. She sat on the floor with me in a hospital hallway. And when I started to cry, she let me cry. And when I was done, she said, I'm still here. And she was. He stopped. He turned the coffee mug in his hands once. She sat with me for 4 hours, he said. She was on a break for the first 30 minutes. After that, she was technically off shift. She didn't leave. She stayed until my aunt arrived from Tucson and I had someone to go with. He exhaled carefully, managing the ribs. Before I left, she gave me something, off her own wrist. A small medical bracelet. It was one of those ID bracelets they wear for patient emergencies. Her name was on it. She said, keep this so you don't forget that there are good people in the world. Emily set her coffee mug down very slowly. I still have it, Caleb said. He reached into his shirt pocket in the same careful, deliberate movement and set something on the table between them. A medical ID bracelet, old, the metal worn at the edges, the clasp stiff with age. Emily looked at it and felt the air leave her body. She had seen that bracelet before. Not the same one, but the same style, the same vintage, the same kind. Her grandmother had kept one in the drawer of her nightstand, not wearing it, just keeping it. And when Emily had asked about it as a child, Grace had smiled in a way that was slightly private and said, I gave the matching one to someone who needed it more than I did. The matching one. She was looking at it right now. She reached out and picked it up with both hands very carefully, the way you handle something that belongs to a moment you were never inside. The name on it was worn but legible. G. Carter. Her throat closed. How? She stopped, cleared it, tried again. How did you find out who I was on the highway? You didn't know. You couldn't have known. I didn't, Caleb said. Not until you said her name. Grace Carter, working trauma care in Phoenix. And the way you talked about her, the way you described how she sat with people, how she thought about the job, that wasn't something you read. That was something you were taught by someone who lived it. His voice was quiet. I knew within 30 seconds of you saying her name. That's why your face changed. Yes. She was still holding the bracelet. She turned it over in her fingers once, twice. She never told me about you, Emily said. She never mentioned a boy, a hospital AE. She stopped. But she wouldn't have. She didn't talk about specific patients, ever. She said what happened in those rooms wasn't hers to carry out of them. A pause. She talked about the work, not the people. That sounds right, Caleb said. So you spent 30 years looking for a woman who wouldn't have told you where she was anyway. That's accurate, yes. Did you try to find her formally public records online? I tried everything available to me at various points across 30 years. He wasn't frustrated by the question, just factual. Grace Carter is not an uncommon name. The Phoenix medical system went through several administrative reorganizations. Records from that period are incomplete. I had the bracelet, a first and last name, and a memory of a woman's face from when I was 8 years old. He paused. For a long time, I thought I might never find her. And then I made peace with not finding her by doing the thing she asked me to do. Emily looked up. What did she ask you to do? He met her eyes. She told me before I left that hospital that one day when I was strong enough, I should help someone who needed me the way she'd helped me. Silence. A specific kind of silence, the kind that has weight and texture. The foundation, Emily said. The foundation. She set the bracelet back down on the table between them carefully in the exact spot where he had placed it. Tell me about the foundation, she said. And he did. He talked for a long time. He talked the way people talk when they have been carrying something so long that putting it into words is both a relief and an excavation, carefully but with an underlying urgency. Like each sentence was something that had been compressed and finally had room to expand. The Whitmore Hope Foundation had started. He told her 14 years ago with $50,000 of his own money in a rented office space on the east side of Phoenix. Not as a publicity move, not as a tax strategy, not as image rehabilitation for a man with a complicated reputation. It had started because a boy who was terrified and alone had been helped by a woman who didn't have to help him, and that experience had lodged in his chest like a splinter that never quite worked its way out. He had spent the first part of his adult life building a business, logistics, he said, trucking and freight, Nothing romantic about it, and a reputation inside the motorcycle community that was fierce in some ways and complicated in others, and a life that was large and full of people, and almost entirely without the kind of quiet that allows you to hear the thing you've been avoiding. It was at 52 years old, sitting in a hospital waiting room, while one of his closest brothers was in surgery after a roadside accident. Different highway, different circumstances, an echo of a memory that Caleb Whitmore had looked at his own hands and thought, I have been doing this wrong. Not the club, not the business, not the relationships. The thing Grace Carter had given him. The thing he had told himself he was honoring because he was a decent man and a generous one. And he had done good things over the years, small things, individual things. He had been honoring the surface of it. He had not built the structure of it. I went back to Phoenix from that hospital waiting room with something shifting in him that he did not entirely understand, but recognized the same feeling he said as when you are on a long ride and the road suddenly opens up after miles of construction and the horizon appears, and you realize how much you had been unconsciously bracing. He called an attorney, he called an accountant. He called a woman named Rosaria who ran outreach programs for veterans in South Phoenix and who had been telling him for 3 years that the city needed more coordinated support structures and had the data to prove it. The Whitmore Hope Foundation had programs operating in 4 counties now: housing assistance, medical outreach, educational reentry programs for people whose lives had been interrupted by illness, by circumstance, by the kinds of cascading losses that the social support system was not designed to catch. It employed 31 people. It had served in the prior year alone just over 2,000 individuals. Emily listened to all of this without interrupting. When he finished, she sat for a moment looking at the box on the table. What's in the box? She said. Letters, he said. Documentation, receipts from the early funding period, some legal records, and in the middle of all of it, underneath everything else, a letter I wrote to Grace Carter 12 years ago that I never sent because I couldn't find an address. Emily's hands tightened in her lap. Can I read it? He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached over and folded back the top of the box and pushed it toward her. She reached in. The letter was at the bottom, as he'd said. She found it because it was in a different envelope from everything else. Cream-colored sealed her grandmother's name, written on the outside in handwriting that was steady and careful and had clearly been thought about. She held it in both hands without opening it. What does it say? She asked. That I found a way to keep the promise she asked me to keep, he said. And that if she ever read it, I wanted her to know that the thing she gave me in that hallway, not the bracelet. The actual thing was the reason I got back up from every bad place I ended up in the years after. That she made me believe people were worth it. His voice was even. I wanted her to know her work had consequence, that it extended further than she could see from where she was standing. Emily was quiet for a long time. The afternoon had shifted while they talked, the light coming differently through the window. She died not knowing any of this, Emily said finally. Yes. She spent her whole life doing exactly what she told you to do. And she died without knowing that the 8-year-old she sat with on a hospital floor grew up and built something in her name. Not in her name, not officially, but because of her, yes. He paused. I'm sorry she didn't know. Emily set the letter down on the table very carefully. She pushed her chair back slightly and pressed her knuckles briefly against her mouth. A quick private gesture, and then she put her hand back in her lap and looked up at him, and her eyes were clear. She would have hated it, Emily said. He blinked. I'm sorry. If you'd found her and told her all of this, she would have been mortified. Emily's voice had something in it that was not quite a laugh, but was related to one. She had this absolute thing about it, about people giving her credit for just doing her job. My aunt told her once that she was the most selfless person she knew, and she spent 20 minutes explaining in complete seriousness why that was factually incorrect and represented a misunderstanding of her motivations. Now there was a laugh, short, genuine, a little painful. She would have listened to everything you said about the foundation, and then she would have asked you 17 questions about the operational funding model and whether the outreach workers were being adequately compensated. Caleb was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. She sounds exactly like what I remember, he said. Yeah, Emily said. She was. The word was the kind of word that lands with weight. They sat with it for a moment. Then Caleb said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear the whole thing before you answer. Emily looked at him. Okay. The foundation has a healthcare outreach program. We run mobile clinics. We partner with 3 free clinics in the Valley. And we have a coordinator position that has been open for 8 months because I have not found the right person. He looked at her steadily. It's not a favor. I'm not offering you charity. I'm telling you there is a specific job that requires a specific combination of things. Medical literacy, ground-level knowledge of how people without resources navigate the system, and the ability to stay calm in situations that would make most people leave. He paused. I watched you do all 3 of those things in a rainstorm on a highway where everyone else drove past. I'm not offering you something because of who your grandmother was. I'm offering you something because of who you are. Emily's jaw tightened. She looked down at the table. The position includes a training component. Caleb continued. There's a healthcare navigator certification program at Phoenix College, 12 weeks fully subsidized through the foundation. After that, if you want to continue toward a nursing credential, we have an education to support program that covers tuition for employees. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Why are you doing this? She said. Not a question, a testing of the sentence for its real meaning. Because it is what the foundation does, he said. I didn't create a special category for you. This is a real position. It is posted. I have interviewed 11 people for it. None of them were right. He let that sit for a second. You are right, and I think you know that. I've been on the street for a year and a half. I know. You don't know what that does to a person. No, he said. I don't. But I know what it does to a person when someone decides they're not worth stopping for. And I know what it looks like when that same person decides every single day to keep moving anyway. He sat forward slightly, bracing the ribs without acknowledging them. You stopped for me, Emily. On a highway in a storm with no reason to, and every reason not to, you stopped for me. And you stayed. And because of that, I am sitting here with functional circulation in my left leg and a cracked but intact set of ribs instead of bleeding out on Route 202. He looked at her with the directness of a man who had made a very long trip to get to this moment. I am not doing you a favor. I am trying to correct a situation where someone who should have had a different life has not had a different life. And I have the specific ability to help correct that. So I am going to try so. Emily looked up at him. The walls of the fortress were still there, but there was light coming through one of the cracks, and she was not building it back as fast as she normally would. I haven't been in a classroom in 4 years, she said. I know. I don't have a permanent address. Most programs require proof of address. That is solvable. The foundation has transitional housing partnerships. I haven't, she stopped, pressed her hands flat on the table. I have spent 18 months convincing myself that my life was what it was and that I could survive it and that surviving it was enough. And you are sitting here telling me that it isn't enough. And that is, her voice went briefly unsteady. She steadied it. That is a harder thing to hear than it sounds like it should be. Caleb said nothing. He did not rush to fill the silence with comfort or reassurance. He simply sat with her in it the way a woman named Grace had once sat on a hospital floor with a frightened boy and not tried to fix the fear but simply refused to let it be faced alone. After a long moment, Emily said, I want to read the letter. Okay. And then I need to think. Take all the time you need. And then I might have more questions about the coordinator position. He didn't smile, but something in his face shifted slightly in that direction. I'll answer everyone, he said. She picked up the cream-colored envelope with her grandmother's name on the outside and held it in her hands, and for the first time since she had walked through the door, her shoulders came down from the particular brace of a person who has been ready to defend themselves for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like to stand without armor. She didn't open it yet. She just held it. And outside Phoenix kept moving cars and buses and ordinary people navigating their ordinary lives, and in a quiet house on a side street, 2 people who had arrived at the same point from completely opposite directions sat together at a table with a worn metal bracelet and an unsent letter between them, and the space between them was full of something that neither of them had a clean name for, but that both of them recognized. It was the specific feeling of a story that had been running for 30 years finally finding the last page. She read the letter 3 times. The first time she read it fast, the way you read something when your hands are shaking and your eyes keep jumping ahead, because some part of your brain is trying to prepare the rest of you for what's coming. The second time she read it slowly, sentence by sentence, stopping twice to press her thumb against the bridge of her nose and breathe. The third time she read it out loud, very quietly, barely above a whisper, because it felt wrong to let those words exist only in her head. Caleb sat across the table the entire time and did not speak and did not look away and did not pretend to be doing something else. When she finished the third reading, she folded the letter back into its envelope, along the original creases, set it on the table, and put both palms flat on either side of it, like she was steadying something that might otherwise slide away. He wrote, she said, that she gave him back the ability to trust people. Yes. That before that night in the hospital hallway, he had decided at 8 years old that the world was a place where the people you needed most would leave. She looked up at him. He wrote that she was the first adult who proved that wrong. That's what I wrote, yes. And he never stopped believing it after that. Even when things were bad, even when the evidence pointed the other direction. Her voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of someone holding something fragile with two hands. He wrote that every time he had reason to give up on people, he thought about a woman who sat down on a hospital floor because a child was scared, and it was enough to keep him going. It was. Emily pressed her fingers briefly against her eyes. Just a second, then her hands came back down to the table. She didn't know, Emily said. She spent 40 years in that hospital. She sat with God knows how many people, in God knows how many hallways, and she carried all of it, and she never knew it mattered like this. She knew it mattered, Caleb said. She just didn't know the specific shape of what it became. That's not the same thing. No, he said quietly, it isn't. The silence between them had a different quality now than it had an hour ago. Less cautious, more like the silence between two people who have arrived at the same place from very different roads and are standing together looking at what's in front of them. Emily picked up the bracelet from the center of the table. She turned it over in her fingers once. She kept the matching one in her nightstand drawer, she said. She never told me why, just said she gave the original to someone who needed it more. She looked at the engraving, G. Carter. I used to wonder about that. When I was little, I would sneak into her room and look at it sometimes. I thought it was a mystery she was keeping on purpose, like a riddle for me to figure out eventually. Did you ever ask her directly? Once, when I was maybe 12. Emily's mouth curved slightly. She said there are things in a person's life that belong to them and the person they shared them with, and those things are sacred, and one day I would understand. A pause. I didn't understand what she meant then. I thought she was being deliberately cryptic to seem interesting. Was she probably partly yes. Now it was definitely a smile, however brief. She had a theatrical side she would never admit to. Caleb laughed, a short sound quickly managed because of the ribs, but genuine. Even 30 years later, I remember she had a quality where everything she said sounded like it was worth writing down. She practiced, Emily said. She absolutely practiced. She had a journal. She would test lines on my grandfather and watch his face to see if they landed. That is the best thing anyone has ever told me about her. The smile faded, but gently. She would have liked you, Emily said. She had a strong pull toward people who were more than they appeared to be. Caleb said nothing, but he accepted it. Emily set the bracelet down. She looked at the box. She looked at him. I'm going to say yes, she said. He waited. I'm going to say yes to the coordinator position and the certification program, but I have conditions. Tell me. I want a real interview. I don't want it handed to me because of this. She gestured at the letter, the bracelet, the box. I don't want to be someone's charity project or someone's way of closing an emotional loop. If I'm going to do this job, I'm going to earn it the same way the other 11 people who interviewed for it earned the chance to be considered. Done. And I want it on record that I'm aware of this, another gesture, and that it has nothing to do with how I perform. You cannot use this as a reason to treat me differently, give me more patience than you'd give anyone else, or protect me from feedback I need to hear. Understood. And if I'm not actually qualified, you tell me. You don't find a way to make it work out of obligation. You just tell me. He looked at her for a moment. You were qualified before you ever stopped on that highway, Emily. The highway is why I know it, but the qualification is yours. You built it. She nodded once, firm, decided. And then because she was Emily Carter, and she had spent 4 years either watching her mother die or surviving the street, And in neither of those situations had there been any room for things to fall apart. She said, "When's the interview?" He looked like he wanted to say tomorrow. He said, "Whatever works for you." "Monday," she said. "Morning, I'll be on time." "I know you will." She stood up. She picked up her backpack. She looked at the letter on the table. "Can I keep that?" she said. "The letter." "It was always meant for your family," he said. She put it carefully in the interior pocket of her backpack, in the same place as the photograph, so that the two things were together. At the door, she paused. "Caleb." "Yeah. What you built the foundation, the program's everything." She turned slightly. "Does the chapter know the rest of the Hells Angels? Do they know what you've been doing?" He looked at her, and the expression on his face was the first genuinely complicated one she had seen from him, layered in a way that suggested the question had more history than a simple answer could hold. "Some of it," he said. She heard what was in the sum, "but not all of it," she said. "Not all of it." She nodded slowly. "Monday," she said, and walked out into the afternoon. She did not know, walking away from that house, that Monday's interview was going to be the least complicated thing that happened that week. She did not know that by Sunday night, everything she had just agreed to was going to be in danger of collapsing before it started. And she did not know that the reason it would be in danger had been standing at the end of the driveway the entire time she was inside. His name was Decker. She had not noticed him on the way in, and she noticed him on the way out because he was leaning against the gatepost in the particular way of a man who wanted to be noticed. Arms crossed, jaw set, the energy of a person who has decided in advance that they don't like something. He was younger than Caleb by at least 15 years, shorter, broader, with the Hells Angels colors on his vest, and a look in his eyes that was assessing her the way you assess a problem. He said, "You're the girl from the highway." It was not phrased as a question. Emily kept walking. "I am." "You spent 2 hours inside." "I wasn't aware of a time limit." He stepped slightly, not into her path, not quite, but close enough to change the shape of the space between them. "Hawk doesn't have people to his house, not people who aren't chapter. He had me." "That's what I said." His voice dropped, not threatening but deliberate. "What did he want?" Emily stopped. She looked at him. In 18 months of living on the street, she had developed a very precise instrument for evaluating intent, for understanding the difference between aggression and anxiety, between a person who would hurt you and a person who was afraid of something, and expressing it through posture. Decker was the second kind. He was not trying to intimidate her. He was worried. "He wanted to thank me," she said, "for stopping on the highway. For 2 hours. He's thorough." Decker looked at her for a long moment. "He told you things. I can see it. You've got the look." She held his gaze. "What look?" "The look of somebody who just got a box dropped on them." He uncrossed his arms. The aggressive angle of his stance softened just slightly. "How much did he tell you? That's between him and me." "No." Decker's voice shifted, still controlled, but something sharper underneath. "Whatever Hawk is into, it's chapter business. Because whatever happens to Hawk happens to all of us. That's how it works." Emily adjusted the backpack strap on her shoulder. "I'm not a threat to him." "I don't know that." "I know you don't, and I understand why you don't." She looked at him steadily. "But I'm going to tell you the same thing I told him. I can't prove my intentions to you ahead of time. All I can do is behave consistently and let you decide based on evidence." She stepped around him. "Give it time." He let her pass, but she heard him as she walked away pull out his phone and dial. She did not need to hear the conversation to know who he was calling. She had walked half a block when her own borrowed phone, the one she had gotten from the shelter's loaner program, an old cracked Samsung that worked most of the time, buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Caleb. "Decker talked to you," she typed back, "Yes," a pause. Then, "He's protective, not malicious." She typed, "I know. I'm not worried about him." Another pause. "Then he doesn't know the full picture. About my work, about why I built what I built. He knows pieces." She stopped walking. She typed slowly, "Why doesn't he know?" The answer took longer this time. Long enough that she had started walking again and turned a corner before it arrived. "Because when I started, I wasn't sure the chapter would understand. And then it became a habit of keeping it separate. And then it became complicated." She read that 3 times. Then she typed, "That's going to be a problem, isn't it?" The reply was immediate this time. "It's already a problem. Has been for a while. I just didn't know what to do with it until recently." She stopped again. Stood on a street corner in Phoenix on a Saturday afternoon with 18 months of hard living behind her, in a Monday interview in front of her, in a text conversation with a man in a Hells Angels vest who had just told her in the careful language of someone who had been managing a situation for too long that the life he had built in secret was sitting on a fault line. She typed, "Does it affect the foundation? Can anyone in the chapter shut it down?" She could feel the weight of the answer before it came. Not legally. The foundation is its own entity, but the chapter has influence on how things are perceived, on who cooperates and who doesn't, on whether the work gets easier or harder, a pause. And I care what they think. Whatever else is true, these are my people. I don't want to be operating in a way they don't understand. Emily put the phone in her pocket and kept walking. She was thinking about something her grandmother had said once about a particular patient who had refused treatment because he was afraid of what the people in his life would think of him if he was sick. Grace had sat back in her kitchen chair with her coffee and said, "The hardest thing I see in that hospital is not the illness. It's the number of people who let the illness get worse because they can't figure out how to tell the truth to the people they love." She thought about that for 6 blocks. Then she took the phone back out and typed, "You need to tell them." Not because it affects the foundation's legal standing, but because you built something true and you've been living like it's a secret, and secrets do damage. Whether they're shameful or not, they create distance, and distance is what makes people assume the worst. She hit send before she could second guess it. She walked another block. Her phone buzzed. "You sound like someone I used to know." She breathed out through her nose. Typed Monday morning. "Don't be late to your own interview." This time the pause was so brief it was barely a pause at all. "I run the foundation, Emily. Then you should know better than to keep people waiting." She pocketed the phone. She did not see the almost smile on the face of a man sitting in a house on a side street with 2 cracked ribs and a 30-year debt that had just found its way home. But she felt something in the air that was adjacent to lightness, and she decided to let it stay. Monday came fast. She was at the foundation's office at 8:53 for a 9 o'clock meeting. The office was on the second floor of a building in Midtown Phoenix that also housed a legal aid clinic and a veterans resource center. The elevator was slow, the carpet was worn, the reception desk was staffed by a woman named Consuela, who was somewhere between 60 and 70, had reading glasses on a beaded chain, and looked at Emily over the top of them with an expression that was professional but not unfriendly. "Emily Carter, yes. Mr. Whitmore is running 4 minutes late. He had a phone call." She gestured at a row of chairs. "Can I get you water coffee?" "Coffee would be great, thank you." Emily sat down. She was wearing the best clothes she could assemble, a collared shirt borrowed from a woman at the shelter who was 2 sizes larger, but the color was right and it was clean and pressed. Dark pants that fit. Her own shoes cleaned the night before with a paper towel and hand soap. She had slept for approximately 3 hours. She had spent the preceding 36 thinking about the interview, going over in her head every question she might be asked about healthcare coordination, outreach program, logistics, patient navigation, trauma-informed communication, all the things she had learned in 2 years at the free clinic, and then carried inside her like ballast through everything that came after. She had also spent a significant portion of that time thinking about Decker, because Decker was not done. She had known it the moment she walked away from him on Saturday, known it with the same street-level certainty that had kept her functional for 18 months. The knowledge that a problem that gets stepped around does not go away, it just changes position. The elevator opened. Not Caleb, Decker. "I was in different clothes from Saturday, but had the same energy, contained tension, a man moving with purpose." He crossed the reception area and his eyes found her before she could recalibrate her expression. He stopped. "You're early," he said. "So are you," she said. He looked at Consuela, who looked back at him with the carefully neutral face of a woman who had been managing complicated men in this office for a long time and had opinions she was keeping to herself. Decker looked back at Emily. He pulled a chair from the row, turned it to face hers rather than sitting parallel, and sat down. It was a deliberate move, confrontational in its geometry, without being aggressive in its manner. "I want to ask you something," he said. "You're going to ask it whether I want you to or not," Emily said. "So go ahead." He was quiet for a second. like she had surprised him. What did Hawk tell you about the foundation? I'm not going to answer that. Why not? Because that conversation is between me and him, and if you want to know what it contained, you should ask him. Decker leaned forward with his forearms on his knees. His voice dropped lower. I've been riding with Hawk for 16 years. 16 years. I know that man in ways that most people in his life don't. And for the last several years, there has been something he is not telling the chapter. Not a small thing, something structural. He looked at her with an intensity that was not anger, it was closer to something wounded. And then a woman shows up after one night on a highway, and he has her to his house and he's texting her on a Saturday, and she walks in here Monday morning like she belongs here. And you want me to just trust the timing on that? Emily looked at him. She understood completely and without judgment what she was looking at. This was a man who was loyal in the absolute way of people who do not give loyalty easily, and who had sensed for years that the person he was most loyal to was holding something back, and who did not know how to metabolize that without an object to attach his frustration to. She was the object. Decker, she said, what's your actual fear? He frowned. What? Not the surface one, not the who is this woman thing. The actual fear underneath that. What is it? He stared at her. For a moment, she thought he was going to stand up and leave. Then he said very quietly that he's built something I don't know about, and that when it comes out, I won't be able to protect him from whatever comes after. Emily sat with that for a moment. He's built something good, she said. I can tell you that much. And he doesn't need protecting from it. He needs someone to know about it. She paused. That someone should be you. But that conversation needs to happen between the two of you, and it needs to happen soon, and it is not mine to initiate. She held his gaze. I think he knows that too. I think he's been working up to it. Decker looked at her. The tension in his frame was still there, but it had changed character less like a wall and more like a load-bearing structure adjusting to new weight. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? I don't know, someone trying to get something. I am trying to get something, Emily said. I'm trying to get a job I'm qualified for. That's not a character flaw. He almost smiled, almost. The elevator opened again, and Caleb Whitmore came out moving on his crutches at a pace that made the crutches seem like an inconvenience. He was managing, rather than a necessity, with a folder tucked under one arm, and the expression of a man who had already done 4 things this morning and was prepared to do 4 more. I took in the scene, Decker and Emily, chairs facing each other, air between them recalibrated but still alive, and his face didn't change in any way that was obvious, but his pace slowed by exactly 1 step. Decker, he said, Hawk, we'll talk tonight. The sentence was not a question. It landed as a fact, the kind that had been waiting to be stated for longer than tonight. Decker looked at him. Something passed between them. The shorthand of 16 years. The compressed language of 2 people who knew each other in the particular way of shared risk and shared history. Yeah, Decker said, we will. He stood, he looked at Emily once more. Then he walked to the elevator without another word and was gone. Caleb watched the elevator doors close. He turned to Emily. How long was he here before I got up? He said. Long enough, she said. What did you tell him? I told him to talk to you. She stood and smoothed her shirt. Are we doing this interview or not? He looked at her for a moment. Conference rooms down the hall, he said and turned toward it. The interview lasted 90 minutes. Rosaria was there, the same woman Caleb had called the night he decided to build the foundation. Now the organization's director of programs, a compact and precise woman in her 50s, with a legal pad full of questions in the eyes of someone who had heard every kind of story and was very good at distinguishing the real ones from the performed ones. She asked Emily about clinical triage, about de-escalation, about how you build trust with someone who has every reason not to trust institutions, about what you do when a client refuses help they demonstrably need, about the difference between serving someone and saving someone and why the distinction matters. Emily answered every question. Not perfectly. She said, I don't know twice, and followed both times with, here is how I would find out. She said, I made a mistake once about a situation from the clinic, and here is what I would do differently now. She did not perform confidence. She didn't have or hide knowledge she did. She was sitting in that conference room exactly who she was, no more, no less. When it was over, Rosaria looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Rosaria. Rosaria said, I'll finish the reference check by Wednesday, but I'll tell you now what I'm going to tell you then. Emily waited. When I interview someone for this position, Rosaria said, I am looking for one thing above everything else. I am looking for someone who understands that the people we serve are not problems to be solved. They are people who have been failed repeatedly by systems that were supposed to catch them. And the specific skill this job requires is the ability to sit with someone in that failure and not flinch and not perform and not make it about your own feelings about their situation. She set down her legal pad. You have that. You have it in a way that can't be taught because it comes from somewhere real in you. A pause. Wednesday, Emily. Emily nodded. She held it together until she was in the elevator. Then she pressed the button for the ground floor and let her head fall back against the wall of the elevator and closed her eyes and breathed for 10 seconds in a way she had not been able to breathe in a very long time. Not because it was over, because something was beginning. And beginning after years of things only ending was a physical sensation, something loosening in the chest, something that hurt in the specific way that returning circulation hurts when blood moves back into a place that had gone numb from long stillness. She walked out of the building into the Phoenix morning. She had nowhere specific to be until Wednesday. But for the first time in 18 months, that felt temporary in a way she could believe. That night in a house on a side street, a man with 2 cracked ribs and a lifelong habit of carrying things alone sat across from a man he had ridden with for 16 years and told him the truth. He told him about Grace Carter, about the hospital hallway, about the 8-year-old boy who decided to spend his adult life honoring a promise made by a woman who sat on a floor and refused to leave. He told him about this foundation, not the outline of it, the interior of it, the why of it, the years of funding and building and coordinating while keeping it compartmentalized because he had not known at the beginning how to explain it without it sounding like something it wasn't, without it sounding like he was stepping outside the life they had chosen, making a judgment about it, becoming someone who looked down from a height at the people beside him. He had been wrong to keep it separate. He said that plainly. Decker listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. When Caleb was done, the room was very quiet. Then Decker leaned forward with his forearms on his knees, the same posture Emily would have noted that he'd used in the Foundation's waiting room, and he said, "You idiot." Caleb looked at him. "You absolute idiot," Decker said, and his voice was thick with something that was the opposite of anger. "You think any of us wouldn't have wanted to be part of this? You think Rollo wouldn't have driven a truck for you? You think Marcus wouldn't have run security for your outreach events? You think I wouldn't have—" He stopped. He pressed his jaw together. 16 years, Hawk. You did this alone for 16 years when you had people. Caleb said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I know." It was the question underneath all the other questions, the one that actually mattered. And Caleb Whitmore, who had spent 30 years building walls and structures and organizations and a reputation, sat in the quiet of his living room and told his oldest living friend the real answer. "Because she helped me," he said, "when I had nothing to offer her, nothing. I was 8 years old and I was terrified and I was useless. And she helped me anyway. And I have spent my entire adult life believing that I understood what that meant, that I had built the meaning of it into everything I did." He paused. "But the truth is I was still only doing it alone. I was still only letting it be mine. And that's not what she modeled. What she modeled was you sit down on the floor next to the person who is scared. You don't manage it from a distance. You get on the floor with them." He stopped. He looked at his hands. "I think I've been managing from a distance for a very long time," he said. The room held that. Decker reached across and put a hand on the back of Caleb's neck. Brief, firm, the way men who don't have adequate language for tenderness express it, and then leaned back and said, "So we fix it." Yeah. You tell me what you need. I'll get the chapter together. We figure out what it looks like when it's not a secret anymore. Decker's voice was steady. "It's better work than we've been doing anyway." Caleb looked at him. "The girl," Decker said, "Emily, she told you to do this, didn't she?" "She told me you needed to know." "She's going to be a problem," Decker said. But the way he said problem had shifted completely from the way he'd meant it that morning. "I know," Caleb said. "Good problem, though." "Yeah," Caleb said, "good problem." Outside Phoenix hummed and turned in the dark. Wednesday was 2 days away. A box of letters sat on a table in a quiet house. A cream-colored envelope rode in a backpack beside a photograph of a woman who had never known the full size of what she left behind. And somewhere under the Camelback Bridge, Emily Carter lay on her back looking up at the underside of concrete and felt for the first time in a very long time the unfamiliar and terrifying and necessary sensation of hope, arriving not as a wish, but as a plan. Wednesday came. Rosaria called at 10:17 in the morning, which Emily knew because she had been watching the borrowed phone since 8 o'clock with the focused attention of someone who has learned that the only way to survive waiting is to make it a deliberate act rather than a passive one. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, Emily sat very still on the edge of the cot in the transitional housing unit the foundation had arranged 3 days ago. Caleb had made one phone call, and 48 hours later, she had a room with a door that locked and a shared bathroom down the hall and a window that looked out over a parking lot, and it was the most private space she had occupied in 18 months, and she was still not entirely used to the sensation of walls around her when she slept, and she sat there with the phone in her lap and let the information land. She had the job, not provisionally, not conditionally pending further review. She had it fully with a start date of the following Monday, and a salary that was modest but real, and a benefits package that included Rosaria had told her tuition support for the Phoenix College Certification Program beginning in January. She had the job. She pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum, hard because the feeling in her chest was too large and had nowhere to go, and she was not ready to cry and could not afford to be undone. Right now. Not with a Monday start date and a certification program to prepare for and approximately everything in her life that still needed to be addressed. She breathed. She texted Caleb. Rosaria called. His reply came in under 30 seconds, and she stared at the screen. She had 10 different responses lined up in her head, some of them composed, some of them more honest than she was quite ready to be. And what she sent was Monday. His reply was a single word, good. And then after a pause of maybe 15 seconds, that she spent reading that single word 4 times, proud of you. She put the phone face down on the cot. She sat there for another 2 minutes. Then she stood up, shouldered her backpack, old habit. The thing had been attached to her body for so long, she didn't feel right without it, and went to find out what came next. What came next, it turned out, was harder than she expected. Not in the way she had prepared for. She had prepared for the professional difficulty, the certification coursework, the learning curve of a new organization's systems and language, the challenge of building credibility in a role where everyone had watched 11 other people try and not make it to an offer. She had mapped those difficulties in her head, had calculated her deficits and her assets against them, had gone to sleep every night that week running through scenarios. What she had not prepared for was the internal difficulty, the one that had no syllabus. She discovered it on her first day sitting in the intake meeting for a new client, a 51-year-old woman named Patricia, who had been living in her car for 7 months after a landlord sold the building that she'd rented in for 9 years, and the replacement housing she found was gone before she could finish the application, and the second one fell through when her disability payment didn't process in time, and the third one, but Patricia didn't get to the third one in that first meeting. She stopped at the second one, and she stopped because her voice broke, and she looked at the floor and she said, in the voice of someone who has been explaining their situation to institutions for so long that the explanation has become its own kind of trauma, "I'm sorry, I know you need the information, I'm trying." And Emily said, without thinking, without strategy, "Patricia, you don't have to explain anything right now. You can just sit for a minute." Patricia looked up. She had the expression of someone who had been bracing for a different sentence, the expression of someone who had heard, "You'll need to complete the intake form, and we have other clients to get to, and I understand this is difficult," but more times than the expression had anywhere left to go. "You mean that?" she said. "I mean it," Emily said. "We have time." Patricia looked at her for a long moment, and then she said very quietly, "Nobody ever said that to me before, in all the offices I've been in." Emily's chest tightened in the specific way it had been tightening repeatedly since Monday. She managed it the way she was learning to manage it, acknowledged it, did not perform it, let it inform what she said next without letting it become the center of the room. "Well," Emily said, "I'm saying it. Take a breath. We'll get there." That night she told Caleb about it, not in a debriefing tone. They had fallen into a pattern quickly in those first weeks of short conversations at the end of working days, sometimes in person at the office, sometimes by text, occasionally by phone. It had developed naturally the way useful habits develop without either of them formally deciding it should exist. She told him about Patricia, about the sentence she had said, without thinking about the way Patricia had looked at her. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the job. That's exactly the job." "I know," Emily said. "I just wasn't ready for how much it would take out of me." "It always takes something out of you," he said. "If it's not taking something out of you, you're not actually present. You're just processing." He paused. "Your grandmother knew that. You could see it, couldn't you, the way she talked about the work? It cost her something." Emily thought about the way Grace had looked sometimes at the end of a long hospital shift. Not broken, not defeated, but emptied in a particular way, like a vessel that had given out what it had and needed time to refill. "Yes," she said. "The trick," Caleb said, "is figuring out how to refill without closing yourself off, how to restore the capacity without building walls that weren't there before." He paused. "I'm still working on it, if that's any comfort." "You've been working on it for 30 years. "Yeah," a dry sound that might have been a laugh. "Don't let that discourage you." She didn't. She went back every day. The work was not glamorous. It was intake forms and phone calls and sitting with people in waiting rooms while they tried to remember the documents they needed and didn't have. It was navigating three-way conversations between a client who was exhausted and a housing caseworker who was overloaded, and a system that had been designed by people who had never been inside it as a recipient. It was learning quickly which social workers in the county would actually call you back and which ones had learned to let everything go to voicemail as a survival strategy. It was driving the Foundation's outreach van to a parking lot off McDowell on a Thursday evening and setting up a folding table with blood pressure cuffs and basic first aid supplies and watching people approach the table slowly sideways, the way they approach anything that is supposed to help them, because helping has so often meant something else. She was 3 weeks into the job when she saw someone she recognized. He was in his 40s, broad-shouldered, with the particular combination of hypervigilance and exhaustion that she had learned to read as the signature of someone who had been on the street for more than a year. He hung back at the edge of the parking lot for 10 minutes before she got up from the table and walked over to him, because she had learned that sometimes approaching was better than waiting, that sometimes a person needed someone to come to them to believe they were worth the movement. His name was Robert. He had been a mechanic for 20 years before a back injury took the job, and the job had taken the insurance. And the insurance had taken the surgery option, and without the surgery, the back had gotten worse, and the rest of it had followed in the particular cascading logic of American poverty that looks like personal failure until you see it from the inside and understand it's structural. Emily sat with him on a parking block for 40 minutes. She did not fix everything. She fixed what she could tonight: blood pressure reading, referral to the county pain management clinic, a bag with food and hygiene supplies from the van. She got his name in the system. She gave him a card and told him she would be back Thursday. "You'll actually be back," he said. "I'll be back," she said. "People say that." "I know they do," she said. "I'll be back anyway." She drove back to the Foundation that night and wrote up her notes and sat at her desk for a moment after she was done feeling the weight of the day distributed across her body, the way physical labor distributes itself, and thought about Robert and Patricia and the 11 other people she had talked to that week, and thought about her grandmother, standing in hospital hallways for 40 years, absorbing this same weight, and thought about whether it was possible to do this indefinitely without becoming someone who was only capable of doing this. She was still sitting with that question when Decker walked in. She had not spoken to him since the waiting room confrontation. She had seen him at the office twice in passing, and each time he had given her a nod that was not unfriendly, but not open. She had returned the nod and not pushed. He came to the door of her office, a small room, a desk, a lamp, a filing cabinet entirely functional, and knocked on the frame. "Got a minute?" he said. She looked up. "Sure." He came in and sat in the chair across from her desk with the same deliberate posture he always had, like he needed to establish physical intention before he spoke. "How's it going?" he said. "Good. Busy." She waited. "I was at the Thursday outreach last week," he said. "You didn't see me. I was in the van helping Terrence set up." He looked at his hands briefly. "I watched you with that man at the edge of the lot, the one who didn't want to come to the table." She said nothing. "You got up," Decker said. "You went to him. You sat down in a parking lot. He looked at her. That's not people don't usually do that. The people who come out here and set up tables usually wait for the clients to come to them. They've got the supplies, they've got the setup, they figure that's enough of a signal. He paused. You walked across the parking lot and sat down on the asphalt. He wasn't going to come to the table. I know. He looked at her with an expression that was still evaluating, but had shifted in its methodology, less interrogation, more inventory. Hawk told me about your grandmother, about the hospital, about what she did for him. Emily was quiet. He should have told us years ago, Decker said. All of it. I want you to know I told him that. Directly. I heard, she said. He told me. Decker nodded. The chapter met 3 days ago. He explained the foundation, the whole thing, what it does, where the money comes from, what the programs are. He paused. Some of the guys had questions, not hostile ones, real ones. They wanted to understand it. And Marcus wants to run security for the outreach events. Rollo's got a truck he's been using for deliveries. He offered it for food distribution runs. 2 other guys said they'd volunteer on weekends. He paused. And one of them guy named Pete, he's got a sister who's been trying to get into a housing program for 6 months. Hawk is getting her application moved through the right channels this week. Emily looked at him. He didn't need a secret, Decker said. He needed to let people in. I know, she said. You told him that. I suggested it. Don't undersell it. His voice was direct. He'd been sitting on this for 16 years. He needed someone from outside the situation to say the obvious thing plainly, and you said it. He looked at her steadily. I gave you a hard time. In the beginning. I want you to know I was wrong about the reasons, even if the protective instinct was right. Emily held his gaze. You were worried about him, she said. That's not something to apologize for. No, he said, but the way I expressed it. Decker. She folded her hands on the desk. I've spent 18 months on the street. I've met a lot of people who expressed things badly because they were afraid. I don't hold that against anybody. A pause. What I hold against people is when they know better and keep doing it anyway. You adjusted. Fast. She met his eyes. That counts. He looked at her. Something in him settled. You're going to be good at this job, he said. I know, she said, and it came out without arrogance, just the plain factual certainty of someone who had done the calculation honestly and trusted the result. He almost smiled. It made it all the way this time. He stood to go, and then he stopped in the doorway. My sister, he said, without turning. She was homeless for 2 years, about 8 years ago. Before I met Hawk, before the chapter, before I had the means to help her. I didn't know where she was for 4 months. He paused. When I found her, it was bad. We got her out eventually. She's okay now, but I've never, he stopped. His shoulders carried the weight of the sentence he wasn't finishing. I've never been able to do anything about the 4 months before I found her. For other people in that situation. I've wanted to, but I didn't know how. Emily was very still. The Thursday outreach, she said, we go every week. We need people who can do initial approach. Walk across the parking lot, sit down on the asphalt. She looked at him. Can you do that? He turned around. Yeah, he said, I can do that. Thursday, 6 o'clock. Bring the instinct you used on me in the waiting room, the reading people part, not the threat assessment part. He laughed, fully this time. It changed his entire face. Fair enough, he said. He left. Emily turned back to her desk and picked up her pen and sat for a moment. Things were moving. She could feel it, not as abstract momentum, but as something concrete and specific. The sensation of pieces aligning that had been misaligned for a very long time. Patricia with a housing referral in process. Robert with a clinic appointment scheduled for next week. Decker on the Thursday team. The chapter behind the foundation now with resources and reach the foundation had not had before. A certification program starting in January that would in 12 weeks give Emily a formal credential to put beside the knowledge she had been carrying without official recognition for 4 years. It was progress. Real specific, unglamorous progress. And it was also, she was learning, more fragile than it looked. The call came on a Friday afternoon 3 weeks after she started, and it came to Caleb's direct line, and it came from a woman named Aldridge who worked for a local television station and who had, she said, been following up on a tip about the Whitmore Hope Foundation. Caleb took the call in his office with the door open, which is how Emily heard part of it, and what she heard was enough to bring her to his doorway. He was standing behind his desk with his weight off the left leg, the fracture still limiting him 4 weeks out from the accident, and his voice was even and his face was not quite. I'm going to ask you to hold that story, he was saying. Not indefinitely, but there are people involved whose situations are active and a premature story could compromise. He stopped. Listen, I understand you have a deadline. I'm asking for 10 days. He listened again. I appreciate that, Miss Aldridge. 10 days. He hung up. He looked at Emily in the doorway. Someone tipped a television reporter, he said, about the foundation, about me, about the accident, about everything. The accident, the connection to the chapter, the programs. They apparently have photographs from the Thursday outreach. He sat down carefully. She's planning a piece on how she phrased it was a Hells Angels secretly running a homeless outreach charity. Emily came all the way into the office. That's not necessarily bad, she said carefully. No, he agreed. It's not necessarily bad. It depends entirely on the framing of the footage they use and whether the people we serve end up feeling like subjects rather than. He stopped. Our clients did not sign up to be a human interest story. No. And the chapter, he put his hand briefly over his face. We just had the conversation with the chapter. 4 days ago, we just got to a place where they understand what this is and they're ready to be part of it. If the story runs wrong, if the framing is, if it becomes some kind of spectacle about bikers doing charity, it undercuts the work, Emily said. It undercuts everything. He looked at her. I need 10 days to get ahead of this. I need to talk to every client whose case is active and get their understanding of what might happen. I need to sit with Rosaria and figure out what the public version of this story looks like when we control the narrative. And I need to talk to the chapter again before they hear it from somewhere else. What do you need from me? She said. He looked at her. It was a particular look, the same look she had begun to recognize that he had given her on the highway in the rain when she had refused to leave, and at the table when she had laid out her conditions for the job, and in a dozen small moments since then, where she had done something that caught him in the act of revising his expectations upward. You know our clients, he said, better than anyone right now. You have been with them on the floor of that parking lot, at their kitchen tables, in waiting rooms. They trust you. He paused. I need you to be the one who has these conversations with them, about the story, about consent, about what they want. Emily thought about Patricia, about Robert, about the particular brittleness of trust built on a foundation of repeated institutional failure, how easily it cracked, how much work went into building it, stitch by stitch. What if some of them say no, she said, no coverage, no story. What if some of them say they'll stop using the services if the program becomes public? Then we protect them, Caleb said immediately, without question. Their privacy is not negotiable in exchange for publicity. She nodded. Okay, she said. I'll start the conversations Monday. She was almost out the door when he said her name. She stopped. Emily. His voice was different, lower, the register he used when something had moved through the professional layer into something underneath it. I want to ask you something I haven't asked you. She turned. How are you, he said, not the social question, the same question he'd asked in the very first phone call, the one with weight, the one asking for real information. She stood in the doorway and thought about it honestly. 3 weeks of a job that opened her up every day and sent her home emptied. A room with a door that locked that she was still slightly startled by every morning. A certification program in January that was both necessary and frightening. A grandmother who had been dead for 4 years and who was more present in her daily life now than she had been at any point in the time since. Because every interaction Emily had in this job was a kind of conversation with Grace Carter that Emily was having on her behalf. I'm overwhelmed, she said, and grateful and scared, and better than I've been in 4 years. A pause. All at once, simultaneously. Caleb looked at her. That sounds right, he said. Does it get easier to hold all of it at once? No, he said, but you get stronger at holding it. She considered that. Is that enough? It's what there is, he said, not dismissively, truthfully. The way someone tells you the truth when they respect you enough not to soften it into something easier, but less useful. She nodded. She went home. She sat in her room with the door locked, in the backpack beside the cot and the photograph of Grace on the small table that was the room's only furniture, beyond the cot and the dresser, And she looked at her grandmother's face, laughing at something off camera, the laugh that had always been slightly too big for the room, but nobody ever told her to make it smaller, and she said out loud quietly to the empty room, "I'm doing it. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm doing it." The empty room said nothing back, but the feeling in her chest said something. It said she knows. She picked up the photograph and held it in both hands and felt the full weight of where she was, not the address, not the room, but the position in her life, the distance between the bridge and this cot, the distance between the girl who had been invisible on these streets and the woman who now walked across parking lots to sit beside people who had been made invisible, the same way, and she let herself feel all of it, without the fortress, without the walls, without the disciplined management of feeling that had kept her functional through the months when feeling would have been too expensive. She let herself feel it, and it was enormous, and it did not destroy her, which was she was beginning to understand the entire point. The client conversations went carefully. She was honest with each person. She told them what was coming, what a story might mean, gave them full information and full agency, and made clear without any ambiguity at all that their answer was valid, whatever it was, and that nothing about their access to services depended on it. Patricia said yes immediately. "If my story helps somebody else not end up where I was," she said, "then my story is worth telling." Robert thought about it for 3 days and then called Emily's direct line at 7 in the morning to say yes. But he had one condition. He wanted to tell his own part of the story himself in his own words and not have someone else narrate it for him. Emily called the reporter back and made that a condition of access. 2 other clients said no. Emily recorded their refusals as absolute and binding, communicated them to Caleb and Rosaria, and made sure their file information was not accessible to anyone outside the program team. On the 7th day, Caleb called Aldridge back and said, "We're ready to talk." The story ran, and 12 days later, it was not the story he had been afraid of. It was not the bikers doing charity framing. He had feared the spectacle version, the version that made the chapter look like props, and the clients look like causes, and the whole operation looked like a man managing his reputation. It was the real story. It was Patricia in her own words. It was Robert talking about a parking lot and a woman who sat down on the asphalt next to him and didn't make him feel like a problem to be processed. It was Caleb talking about an 8-year-old boy in a hospital hallway and a nurse who sat on the floor. It was a picture of a worn metal bracelet with a name engraved on it that belonged to someone who didn't live to see what she started. It was Emily Carter, who the story identified simply as a healthcare coordinator and recent hire, nothing about the bridge, nothing about the backpack, because that was her information to give. And she had chosen to give only the part that was useful, being quoted as saying, "The most important thing this organization does is not provide services. It's provide presence. The message that someone will come across the parking lot to find you, not wait for you to find the strength to come to them." That message is the whole thing. The foundation's donation line received 47 calls in the 24 hours after the story aired. Rosaria printed out the tally and put it on Caleb's desk without comment. He looked at it for a long time. Then he went down the hall to Emily's office and stood in the doorway the way she had stood in his, and he said, 47 calls. She looked up from her desk. "In one day," he said. She set her pen down. "She would have handled that gracefully," Emily said. "My grandmother, she would have received that information and said something like, 'Good, now what do we do with it?' And then she would have started making a list." Caleb looked at her. The late afternoon had come in sideways and the office was warm, and somewhere down the hall, Consuelo was on the phone with a client, and the sound of that conversation, patient, steady, the sound of someone working, was the ambient sound of the place they had built and were building. "Good," Caleb said. "Now what do we do with it?" Emily picked her pen back up. "I'm already making the list," she said. The list grew. That was the thing. Nobody told you about building something real. It did not stay the size you built it. It expanded in the specific, unglamorous way of living, things putting out branches. You hadn't planned for finding light in directions you hadn't considered, becoming more complicated and more necessary simultaneously. Emily's list, which had started as a single page of intake improvements and outreach scheduling adjustments, had by the 3rd month become a document that lived in a binder on her desk and had 17 subsections and 43 action items with names attached and deadlines in ink. Rosaria had looked at it once and said, without inflection, You're going to want a bigger binder, and gone back to her own office, which Emily had interpreted correctly as the highest form of professional compliment Rosaria was capable of issuing. The 47 calls from the television story had become, by the end of the first month, 112. The 112 had become donations that funded 2 additional outreach events per month. The additional events had brought in 63 new clients in 6 weeks. And 63 new clients meant 63 new intake conversations, 63 new navigations of the county system, 63 new human beings sitting across from Emily Carter and learning, often for the first time, that someone was going to come across the parking lot rather than waiting for them to find the strength to cross it themselves. She was running on 6 hours of sleep and black coffee and something she could only describe as purpose, which was a word she had avoided for years because it had felt like a luxury she couldn't afford and now felt like the most practical thing she owned. Caleb watched her work with the same focused attention he brought to everything and said nothing about the pace, and then one morning arrived at her office at 7:45 with 2 cups of coffee and sat in the chair across from her desk and said, "You're going to burn out." She looked up from the binder. "Good morning to you too," she said. "I mean it." He set her coffee on the desk. "I've seen this pattern before. In Rosaria when she was first building the veterans program. In myself twice in the early years of the foundation." He wrapped both hands around his own cup. "You are running at a pace that is sustainable for approximately another 4 to 6 weeks, and then your body's going to make the decision for you." "I'm fine." "You said that to me on a highway in a rainstorm when you had been living under a bridge for a year and a half," he said. "I've learned to cross-reference that statement." She put her pen down. She sat back. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. "If I slow down," she said, "people don't get seen. There are people on that list who have been waiting for a callback for 9 days. 9 days, Caleb. I know what 9 days feels like when you're waiting to find out if you have a place to sleep." "I know you do. So how do I slow down?" "You don't slow down," he said. "You build the structure so the pace doesn't depend only on you." He looked at her steadily. "That's what I got wrong in the beginning. I thought the work depending on me meant I was necessary. It actually meant I hadn't done my job correctly." He paused. "We need to hire another coordinator, and we need to bring in 2 more volunteers for Thursday outreach. And you need to stop answering emails before 7 in the morning." She was quiet for a moment. "Decker asked me last week if we had room for more chapter involvement," she said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd look at what we actually needed rather than what sounded good." She pulled a page from the binder. "Medical transport. 3 of our clients missed clinic appointments last month because they couldn't get a ride. Decker has 6 guys with trucks and no standing obligations on Tuesday mornings." Caleb looked at the page. "Talk to him," he said. "I was going to." She looked at him. "But I wanted to make sure you were still okay with the chapter being this involved. A month ago, you were managing the fact that they didn't know about any of this. Now they're volunteering twice a week and Decker is asking about expansion. I'm more than okay with that. Because if it ever becomes complicated, Emily," his voice was patient but firm, "stop looking for the way this goes wrong." She blinked. He said it without harshness, but it landed. She had been doing that, she realized. Constantly running the failure scenarios, the contingency plans, the ways the structure could crack. She had been doing it for 3 months without noticing it had become its own kind of weight. "It's a habit," she said finally. "I know what it's a habit from," he said, "and I understand it. But at a certain point, the habit stops being protective and starts being a ceiling." He looked at her directly. "You have earned the right to believe this is going to hold. You built it to hold." She looked at him for a long moment. "When did you figure that out?" she said. "The ceiling thing." He was quiet for a second. "Slowly," he said. "Over years, and then all at once." He picked up his coffee, and the thing that finally made it click was sitting in a hospital, having someone tell me that a homeless woman with no reason in the world to trust anything had run toward a car wreck to help a stranger because she had been taught that human life was worth running toward. He held her gaze. "If you can run toward that on that night, from where you were then, you can believe the thing you're building is going to stand." Emily pressed her lips together. She looked at her binder. She looked at the ceiling. She said, "I want to name something." "Name it." "I want to name the center after her." The room went quiet. Caleb set his coffee down very carefully. "Tell me what you mean," he said. "Not resistance, precision. He wanted to hear her say it. The foundation is expanding. Rosaria told me last week that the board has been discussing a permanent community medical facility, a fixed location, not just outreach vans and partner clinics, but an actual building with actual equipment where we can do consistent primary care for people who don't have access. She looked at him. If that happens, I want it to be called the Grace Carter Community Medical Center. Caleb didn't speak immediately. She watched his face move through something, not a simple emotion, but a layered one, the kind that has been compressed for a long time and requires more room than a single expression can contain. She never wanted credit, he said. I know. That is part of why it should be hers. Emily leaned forward. She spent 40 years doing this work, and she died without knowing the full size of what it started. We cannot give her that. We cannot go back and tell her. But we can build something with her name on it that will be there when people need it because of the specific work she did. And we can make it true that whoever walks through that door will walk through it because of Grace Carter. Her voice was steady and certain. That's not about credit. That's about legacy. There's a difference. Caleb looked at her. His jaw tightened once. Then he said, the board meets in 3 weeks. I know. I want you at that meeting, not as support staff, as a presenter. She felt the weight of that. I've never presented to a board, she said. No, but you have stood in a parking lot in the dark and talked a man off the edge of the decision to stop trying. You have sat in a hospital intake room and made a woman who had been through 7 months of institutional failure feel like a person again in under 4 minutes. You have run toward things that everyone else ran away from your entire life. He looked at her. A boardroom is easier than any of those things. She breathed out. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. He picked up his coffee and stood, and at the door he paused in the now familiar way of a man who always has one more thing. Emily. Yeah, when January starts, when the certification program begins. He didn't turn around, which she had learned meant the thing he was about to say was something he needed to say to the door rather than to her face. You're going to be in a classroom with people who are 22 years old, who have never had their education interrupted, and who have never held someone's hand through a medical emergency in a rainstorm, and who have never spent a night under a bridge, and who are going to be your classmates. He paused. Some of them are going to be technically faster. Some of them are going to absorb the curriculum in ways that look more efficient, and you are going to sit in that room and your brain is going to tell you that you are behind. She waited. You are not behind, he said. You are carrying 4 years of learning that cannot be tested in a classroom and cannot be graded and cannot be given credit toward a certificate, but is the actual substance of what the certificate is supposed to represent. He paused. Don't let the classroom make you forget what you already know. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, how do you know all of this? Because I spent the first 30 years of my adult life believing I was behind, he said. Because I got on a motorcycle instead of going to college and spent a decade thinking that meant I was catching up. He turned then just enough to look at her over his shoulder. And then a nurse sat on a hospital floor and told me with everything she didn't say that the value of a human life is not determined by what they can produce on a standardized test. He looked at her steadily. I'm passing that on. He left. Emily sat in the silence of her office with the binder open and the list ongoing, and 2 cups of coffee, going cold, and the sensation in her chest of something settling, not resolved, not finished, but correctly weighted, balanced in a way that made the work possible without destroying the person doing it. She picked up the pen. She kept going. January came on a Tuesday. The Phoenix College Certification Program met in a classroom on the east side of the campus in a building that smelled like industrial cleaner and dry erase markers, which was, Emily noted, almost exactly what the clinic had smelled like when she volunteered there 4 years ago before everything changed. There were 16 students in the cohort. 12 were under 25. 2 were in their 30s. One was a 53-year-old man named Gerald, who had worked in restaurant management for 20 years and was making, he explained to the class on the first day, a late career pivot after his wife was diagnosed with a chronic illness, and he spent 8 months navigating the healthcare system on her behalf and decided that if the navigation was this hard for a resourceful person with good insurance, then something needed to change. Emily was the 16th. The instructor was a woman named Dr. Pham, who had been teaching healthcare navigation for 11 years and had the specific quality of someone who had made peace long ago with the fact that her subject was unglamorous and who had decided that the unglamorousness was actually the point. She went around the room on the first day and asked each person why they were there. When she got to Emily, Emily said, "Because someone taught me that the most important thing you can do for a person is make sure they don't face the hard thing alone. And I want to do that work correctly and professionally and with full understanding of every system I'm helping people navigate." Dr. Pham looked at her for a moment. "What someone taught you that?" she said. "My grandmother," Emily said. "She was a trauma nurse for 40 years. What was her name?" "Grace Carter." Dr. Pham was still for just a second. Then she said, "I trained under a Grace Carter at Phoenix Regional in 1997. She looked at Emily with a different quality of attention. Short woman laughed like a fire alarm going off absolute terror with the misfiled chart. Emily's throat tightened immediately. "That's her," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Dr. Pham looked at her for a long moment. "She was the best teacher I ever had," she said simply. And then she moved on to the next student with the professional grace of someone who understands that some moments need to be honored by not making them larger than they already are. Emily looked straight ahead for approximately 90 seconds while her entire nervous system processed what had just happened, and then she wrote in her notebook, "She is everywhere. She was always everywhere. I just couldn't see it yet." She underlined it twice. She passed the 12-week program. Not at the top of the cohort, Gerald was at the top of the cohort with the focused intensity of a man who had come to something late and was not wasting a single minute of it. Emily was third, which was the result she had honestly calculated was achievable based on her starting point, in which she accepted without apology. On the last day of the program, Dr. Pham stopped her in the hallway. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay, the foundation where you work, the Whitmore Foundation." She had clearly looked it up. "I've been watching what they're doing. The outreach model it's the right approach. The mobile clinic structure combined with the fixed point referral network. The client advocacy component." She paused. "We send students for practicum placements, clinical hours. Right now we place them in 3 partner sites. I'd like to talk to your director about a 4th. Emily stood in the hallway of Phoenix College and heard the thing that was happening and held very still inside it. "Rosaria Mendez," she said. "She's the programs director. I'll make the introduction." "Good," Dr. Pham said. And then with a small, precise smile, "Your grandmother would have thought the whole thing was overdone and also would have been extremely proud." Emily walked to her car. She had a car now, a 2009 Honda Civic that needed a new muffler and had a crack in the passenger window that she was going to get fixed, eventually bought with 3 months of careful saving and a small loan from the Foundation's Employee Assistance Program. And she sat in the driver's seat and did not start the engine for approximately 4 minutes. She thought about a bridge in Phoenix. She thought about a backpack with $4 and a granola bar. She thought about a highway in a rainstorm and a man in a leather vest who told her to leave, and the absolute cellular certainty she had felt in that moment that leaving was not an option. She thought about a cream-colored envelope with her grandmother's name on the outside. She started the car. She drove to the Foundation. The board meeting was 6 days away, and she had a presentation to finish. She worked on it every night that week. Not alone, Rosaria sat with her on Tuesday evening and helped her structure the data, and Decker came by on Wednesday with a folder of photographs from the Thursday outreach events that he had been quietly systematically taking for 2 months, because Decker had turned out to be, among his other qualities, a man with a good eye and a smartphone, and the instinct to document things that mattered. The photographs were not staged. They were exactly what the work looked like. People at tables, people in parking lots, people in chairs in waiting rooms, all of them in the ordinary, unglamorous, specific reality of receiving help and giving it. Emily looked through them for a long time. "These are good," she told him. "I know," he said. "No false modesty. I've been doing it every week. I've got 60 more. Can we use them? I got releases from everyone in frame. Took me 3 weeks." He shrugged. "Seemed like the right thing to do." She looked at him. This was Decker, who had stood at a gatepost with crossed arms on a Saturday afternoon and decided in advance he didn't trust her, who had been carrying a wound about his sister for 8 years without knowing what to do with it, who had come to the Thursday outreach 6 weeks ago and not missed a single one since who had driven Robert to 3 clinic appointments and never mentioned it until Emily found out from Robert himself. "You're good at this," she said. "Turns out," he said, and left it there. The day before the board meeting, Caleb called her into his office. She sat across from his desk. He had a folder open in front of him. His ribs were healed. By now, the crutches gone for 6 weeks. The fracture in the tibia resolved into nothing but a slight change in the way he favored the left leg on cold mornings. "I want to brief you on the board before you go in," he said. "Okay." "There are 9 members. 5 of them are fully supportive of the expansion and the naming proposal. 2 are cautious, not opposed, cautious. They want data on sustainability, and they're going to ask you questions about the funding model. 1 is genuinely undecided, which means he's the one your presentation needs to move." He looked at her. "And 1 is going to push back." "On which part?" "On the naming," he paused. "His name is Garrett. He's been on the board for 9 years. He is not a bad person, but he has a specific view of how institutional naming should work, and it involves significant financial contributions and formal legacy agreements and processes that take 18 months. He looked at her steadily. "He is going to argue that naming the center after your grandmother without those processes in place sets a precedent that undermines the foundation's governance." Emily took this in. "What do I say to that?" she said. "What do you think you say to that?" She was quiet for a moment. "I say that legacy is not always transactional," she said. "I say that the precedent being set here is not that we name things after people who didn't contribute money. The precedent is that we name things after people who contributed the thing the foundation was built on." She looked at him. "The foundation exists because a nurse sat on a hospital floor with a frightened child. That is the founding act. That is the whole reason this room and this table and these 9 people are here having this conversation. Naming the center for Grace Carter is not a deviation from the foundation's values. It is the most accurate expression of them that exists." Caleb looked at her. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "That's what you say." She nodded. "One more thing," he said. He reached into the folder and took out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the desk. She looked at it. It was a letter, his handwriting the same steady, careful hand she recognized from the cream-colored envelope. But this one was not sealed. This one was meant to be read. It was addressed to the board of the Whitmore Hope Foundation. "It began in 1994 when I was 8 years old. A woman named Grace Carter made a decision that changed the direction of my life. What follows is what that decision became." Emily read all of it. When she finished, she set it down on the desk very carefully. "You're going to read this at the meeting," she said. "I'm going to read it before you present," he said, "so they understand what they're voting on." She thought about him writing it. Sitting at a table, probably late, probably after the rest of the foundation. Staff had gone home and writing the thing he had carried for 30 years into a document that was going to be read aloud to 9 people in a conference room, because it was the truest way he knew to explain what the name on the building should mean. "Caleb," she said, "yeah, you know this is bigger than the building. Whatever happens in that room tomorrow, whatever they vote," she looked at him. "You know that, right? What you built is already there. It exists. The 47 calls, the 112, Patricia's housing placement, Robert's back treatment, Decker on Thursday, Dr. Pham in the practicum program." She looked at him. "The building is just the building. The thing it represents is already in the world." He looked at her for a long moment. "She'd say something like that," he said. "I know," Emily said. "I learned it from her." The board met on a Thursday morning. Caleb read his letter. The conference room was very quiet while he read it. 9 people sat around a table and listened to a man who had never been comfortable with the kind of vulnerability the letter required. Read every word of it without stopping in a level voice that only changed register once at the line about the 8-year-old boy who had decided the world was a place where the people you needed most would leave, and the nurse who proved him wrong. He finished. He set the letter down. Emily presented. She used Decker's photographs. She used the data intake numbers, housing placements, clinic appointment completion rates, the before and after of the county system navigation outcomes for clients with a dedicated advocate versus without. She talked about Patricia and Robert without using their names because their privacy was not hers to trade for persuasion. She talked about what a fixed location medical center would mean not in abstract terms, but specifically concretely. The number of clients currently losing appointment slots because transportation failed the number who would use walk-in primary care if it existed within 2 miles of the highest need zip codes. The number who had told her directly in the specific language of people who have been failed by systems repeatedly that they didn't go to the doctor because the doctor required an appointment and the appointment required a phone and the phone required. She stopped. She looked at the 9 people around the table. The building we are talking about is not a symbol, she said. It is a solution to a specific set of problems that have specific human costs. People are getting sicker because they cannot navigate what was built to help them. We can fix part of that. We are already fixing part of that. The center makes us able to fix more. She paused. And the name on the door, Grace Carter's name, is not a decoration. It is a statement about what the building is for. It is for the person who would otherwise not come in. It is for the person who needs to be told before they even open the door that inside this place, the value of their life is not going to be decided by what they can produce or prove or afford. She looked around the table. Grace Carter spent 40 years communicating that message. This building will communicate it for as long as it stands. That is what the name means. Garrett across the table had his hands folded in front of him. He had not interrupted her. He was looking at her with the focused, slightly resistant expression of a man who had come in with a position and was being moved from it against his preference, which was uncomfortable for him and visible on his face. He said, "You said the building communicates a message, but a building doesn't communicate anything by itself. It communicates what the organization inside it demonstrates every day." He looked at her. "How do you guarantee the daily demonstration matches the message on the door?" Emily looked at him. "You can't guarantee it," she said, "any more than Grace Carter could guarantee that the child she sat with on a hospital floor would grow up and do something with what she gave him. You build the structure, you hire the right people, you stay accountable, and you show up every day." She paused. "Guarantees are not how this kind of work functions. Commitment is how it functions. And I am telling you, as someone who has been inside this organization for 4 months and inside this city's shelter system for 18 months before that, that the commitment in this room is not hypothetical." Garrett looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. Caleb said nothing. He was the founder, and he was letting the presentation stand on its own, which Emily had understood was the right call and had not needed to be told. The vote was 7-2. Emily didn't learn the result until after she'd stepped out of the conference room to give the board their deliberation space, and she learned it from Rosaria, who came out of the room 18 minutes later and said simply 7-2 and went back to her office. Emily stood in the hallway. She stood there for a moment and thought Grace Carter Community Medical Center. The name was going to be on a building. A real building on a real street in the real Phoenix, where real people were going to walk through a door that had her grandmother's name above it and find inside the specific thing Grace Carter had been trying to give people for 40 years without ever getting to see the full size of what she was building. Caleb came out of the conference room last. He looked at Emily in the hallway. 7-2, she said. 7-2, he said. They stood in the hallway and the building hummed around them with the ordinary sound of purposeful work. Consuela on the phone, someone's printer, the elevator at the end of the hall, and neither of them said anything for a moment because the moment did not require anything said. Then Emily asked, "What was the site?" "East McDowell, the old community center building. The city has been trying to find a tenant for 2 years." He paused. "I know the city councilwoman for that district. She's been watching what we do. I think the conversation is ready to have. When Monday, I want to be in that meeting." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "You will be." The groundbreaking happened 7 months later on a Tuesday morning in September. It was not a grand ceremony. Caleb had been specific about that. No press release beyond the local neighborhood newsletter. No television cameras, no performance of significance. A small gathering of the people who had built the thing and the people who would use it, which turned out to be appropriately many of the same people. Patricia was there. She was in transitional housing, now stable for 4 months, and she had taken to volunteering at intake on Tuesday afternoons with the specific effectiveness of someone who understands the system from the inside and uses that understanding to make it less frightening for the next person through the door. Robert was there. His back was being managed with the treatment plan the county clinic had finally been able to execute, and he was working 2 days a week doing maintenance for a property management company that the foundation had a relationship with, and he had told Emily 3 weeks ago, with the matter-of-fact quality of someone who had decided not to make a big deal of good news in case it reversed itself, that he had found an apartment. Decker was there with 4 members of the chapter, all of them in their vests because Caleb had specifically told them to wear the vests, because the vests were part of who they were, and this was not an occasion that required disguise. Dr. Pham was there. She had brought 2 current students for the practicum program, which was in its second cohort. Now, 10 students placed at the foundation for clinical hours over 12 weeks, and the arrangement had already produced 1 full-time hire who was sitting in what used to be the second chair in Emily's office and was learning the intake system with the focused intensity of someone who had found the thing they were supposed to be doing. Rosario was there with her legal pad, already taking notes on something. And Emily was there. She was wearing her nursing uniform, not yet a nurse, not for another year, but the healthcare navigator certification entitled her to the scrubs and the badge, and she wore them the way she wore everything without performance, as the accurate representation of what she was and what she was becoming. Caleb stood next to her in front of the building. The sign above the door had been installed that morning. Grace Carter Community Medical Center. Black letters on white, clean, no ornamentation. The kind of signage that says the name is enough. Caleb was looking at it. Emily was looking at it. The small crowd behind them was talking the ordinary conversation of people who know each other, the particular warmth of a group and has been through something together and is gathered in its recognition. Caleb said very quietly so only she could hear, "I found her." Emily looked at him. 30 years, he said. "I spent 30 years looking for her." He was still looking at the sign. "And I couldn't find her. And she was already gone. And I thought," he stopped. His jaw worked once. "I thought I had missed it. I thought the chance to close the loop was gone." Emily said nothing. "But the loop didn't need closing," he said. "The loop kept going. It just moved into the next generation." He looked at her then. "She raised you. She put the thing she believed in into the person she loved most, and that person carried it forward without knowing she was carrying it. And then one night it showed up on a highway in a rainstorm and saved my life." He paused. "The work doesn't end when the person does. That's what I understand now. That's what I didn't understand for 30 years. Emily looked at the sign. She thought about a woman who practiced her sentences in a journal and tested them on her husband, who had a laugh too big for the room and never made it smaller, who sat with people in their hardest hours and made sure they did not face the hard thing alone, and never once asked what she would get in return. She thought about a cream-colored envelope with an unsent letter inside waiting on the bottom of a box for 30 years. She thought about a highway in the rain and the absolute certainty she had felt kneeling in the water beside a stranger that leaving was not something she was capable of. She understood now where that certainty had come from. It had not been bravery, it had been inheritance. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and found what she always found there now. Not the backpack, not the photograph. Those were at home in the apartment she had been in for 6 weeks stable and hers and paid for with her own salary, but a small metal bracelet that she kept with her every day, not on her wrist but in her pocket where she could feel it when she needed to. G. Carter. She closed her fingers around it. She looked at the sign above the door. She looked at the people gathered behind her, Patricia and Robert and Decker and Rosaria and Dr. Pham and the chapter members in their vests, and the foundation staff who showed up every day, and the 2 practicum students who were still figuring out what they were becoming. She looked at Caleb. He was looking at her, and she said simply the truest thing she knew. "She's here." He nodded once. They walked through the door together. Behind them, the September morning continued. Phoenix moving in its ordinary, relentless way, cars and buses, and people with places to be, and problems to solve, and lives that needed navigating. And above the door of a building on East McDowell, the name of a woman who had never known the full size of what she started held its place in black letters on white, steady and permanent, the way the best things are. Not famous, not celebrated, not known by everyone. Known by the people who needed to know. Present for the people who had no one else to stop, exactly as she had always been. And that in the end was the whole story, the truest version of it, stripped of everything except what remained when you took away the accident and the rainstorm and the 30 years and the box of letters and left only the irreducible core of it, a woman chose to stop. And the world changed around that choice in ways she would never fully see, in directions she could not have mapped, into people and buildings and names on doors and hands pressed into other hands in parking lots in the dark. And it kept changing, and it would keep changing, because that is what a single act of genuine human presence does when it finds the right soil. It does not end, it only deepens, it only grows.